you lived in my neck of the woods, you would be very familiar with highways 377 and 108, Alexander Road and Washington Street, or perhaps you're more familiar with Interstates 94 and 35W. But what roads did Moses, Abraham, and Jesus travel? Was travel safe? Did anything interesting happen during their travels? And join us today as we journey down the ancient roads of the Bible. Welcome to the Shalom Y'all Ministries podcast. I'm your co-host, Adam Keim, along with my dear friend, Dr. Daniel McCabe. Daniel, how are you doing these days?
Well, I'm doing good. Always excited to be together with you, and I hope the folks will enjoy this topic today. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it's a fun one. It's kind of making me think of some of the roads that I've been on in Israel these days, and also even some of the routes that are mentioned as you read the Bible too, from days gone by.
You know, I looked up a statistic last night. What do you think is the average number of miles that people drive in a year?
Oh, wow. Okay, so when you lease a car or buy, kind of the standard is the 12,000 per year. When I used to lease cars in my younger days, even I would get far beyond that, and I was just a single guy that didn't have too much to do. So I don't know. I'm gonna guess 16,000.
Well, the statistics I saw was a little bit over 13,000.
Okay.
So that's about kind of what you thought. Well, how many miles will you walk in your lifetime?
Oh, I couldn't even. Wow. All right, so 10,500 steps. Okay, I have no clue.
It said 75,000, what I saw online. And of
Really,
course, we know everything on the
75,000.
internet is correct. So,
Interesting.
well, if you walk a lot every day.
Yeah, there's quite a spectrum there for people that don't get out much and people that just walk all over the place. So,
But I'm not walking today here in Alabama because it's about 35 degrees.
ooh, all right. Well, pace around in your living room to stay warm, I guess.
All right, well,
Then you'll get your steps in. Well, we here at Shalom Y'all truly believe that a walk through the land deepens your walk with the Lord. Our mission is to teach and encourage those who love the Bible, the land of the Bible, and the people of the land. Have you ever dreamt about visiting the promised land? Our hope and prayer is that we could be there with you, our dear listeners, someday when the time is right. Go ahead and reach out for more information on how that can be possible for you or your group. Now, Daniel, I have a mini topic here for us before we jump into the main topic of stories for the road. As I lead into my mini topic, I want to mention to the listeners here that we are going to adjust to one episode per month at least. So one episode per month. So instead of the weekly episodes or bi-weekly episodes, we'll just kind of take it for now, one per month at least, and just see how many others we can sprinkle in from time to time. But for my mini topic for this month, I want to speak about the shortest verse in the English Bible. Daniel, do you know what that is?
I do. I noticed you said the English Bible too, because that's a
Yes,
fun
of course.
discussion if we go beyond that. But yeah, I do. It's my middle son always says it's his favorite verse in the Bible.
Oh, yes. Well, okay. It's easy to memorize, I suppose.
It is.
It is, of course, John 11:35. Jesus wept. Now, there's a lot going on in the context of that verse. Jesus' friend Lazarus died 4 days earlier. Even though a lot of people are familiar with that verse and what's going on around it, I know that a lot of people ask, well, why did Jesus weep in the first place? Now, it certainly would have been sad, of course, for Jesus that Lazarus died, and in his humanity, he would have felt the emotion of losing his friend. And really, it could be as simple as that. However, it is interesting to consider that Jesus knew exactly what he was going to do within just a few minutes of crying about it. I think we get so emotional at funerals because a loved one probably suffered in some way leading up to their death, but mostly because we don't ever get to be with them again, and we already miss them. Now, thankfully, believers do not have to grieve as others do, as the Apostle Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4, because we do get to spend eternity with our saved loved ones, ultimately. So, even though Jesus knew that he was going to bring Lazarus back to life soon, and he even forced the issue by allowing Lazarus to die when he delayed in coming to him, as Martha said in John 11:21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus waited to go to Bethany purposely so that Lazarus would die and that the Lord would then bring him back to life so that many people could witness the power of God and spread the amazing testimony of Lazarus far and wide, so that Jesus had a great crowd to receive him into Jerusalem at his triumphal entry. So it was all according to Jesus' plan of what was going on here. So why did he weep? Well, I think that he was probably saddened at the fact that, well, Lazarus had to die in the first place. That is, the wages of sin is death. When Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, of course, and brought sin into the created order, we as humanity fell into death. They died spiritually that day, as God said, in the day they eat of it, they would surely die. But that consequence meant physical death as well, which they would experience eventually and inescapably. Now, the payment that we earn for sinning, the wages that we earn, so to speak, is physical death, as well as spiritual. Even redeemed believers, you and I, will experience physical death as a consequence of sin. At least that's the norm. We know of Enoch and Elijah that were spared of that fate, which really is a signal for hope, a signal of hope for all people, that they too can be saved, that, life is possible after death. And it was a foretaste also of the eventual rapture of the church. But Lazarus died like everyone else has and will. And I suspect that Jesus was overcome by the gravity of humanity suffering death itself on account of sin. Was Jesus sad that his friend was in the tomb that day? Well, sure. But he might have been even more mournful about the presence of sin and death in the world, oppressing the very image of God. At least that's kind of how I take it, why Jesus would weep at all, knowing that he was going to bring Lazarus back from the dead. So, Daniel, people often say, well, death is just a natural part of life. But you know what? It's not. Death was not the design for God's image when he created Adam. Death is not natural. It's a horrible consequence of our rebellion against God. Now, I know what people mean when they say that, and true enough, death will come to us all, but may we never lose sight of how awful and serious death is, due to how awful and serious our sin is before a holy and righteous God. But just like the example of Lazarus illustrates, our Lord has power over life and death, with an offer for eternal life for everyone who believes. Now, I've addressed the Gospel of John's shortest verse in John 11:35, so let's conclude with its most famous. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Daniel, what is this week's or this month's trivia question?
This trivia question is a little bit unusual. Do you remember when we used to take tests in school? They would list, like, or you can see this sometimes in cartoon strips where they're going to list different things and patterns, and you have to decide which pattern or which picture doesn't match the others. You ever play that game or done
Oh,
that?
yes, I loved those when I was a kid.
Okay. Well, that's what this is going to be like. I'm going to give you four groups of three. And one of them is not like the others. Okay, so you have to tell me which one is not like the others.
All
Ready?
right. Okay, we'll see.
All right. So the first one is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The second one is Adam, Seth, and Noah. The third is Boaz, Obed, and Jesse. And the fourth is David, Solomon, and Rehoboam. Three of those are alike, and one of them is different from the other three. Which one is it? Is it Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Adam, Seth, Noah, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, or David, Solomon, and Rehoboam? Make sense?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll revisit those later in the podcast. Well, Adam, in this episode of Stories for the Road, I want to look at several different roads. I don't know how many we'll be able to get to. There's so many great stories in the Bible that are connected to specific places, and in today's episode, specific roads, highways in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. I wonder how many we could name if we played the game where we have to go back and forth to see how many different places or roads rather in the Bible that we could name how far we'd go. Because I got 5 or 6 of the biggest ones here, but the first one I guess we'll look at is the Jericho Road. You ever been on it?
The Jericho Road. Well, I have, or at least I think I've been to the from place to place along the Jericho Road. Yes, what used to be the Jericho Road.
Yeah, now it's Highway 1, right? But in the Bible days, I guess it was just called the Jericho Road. It's a span of about 18 miles between Jerusalem and Jericho. And it's the backdrop of some really important stories
Yeah,
in the Bible. Most people can name one or two things that happen along the Jericho Road. What are the one or two that come quickly to mind for you, Adam?
I'm thinking of Luke 10, the Good Samaritan,
Okay, for
where
sure. That's the first thing
halfway
to
there
mind.
was a Pandacheon or some sort of inn type caravansary installation there between, probably about halfway between Jerusalem and Jericho.
Okay, very good. So the Good Samaritan. Yep. And here are some others I thought of. You can jump in if you can think of any others too. But so we know the story of Jesus's final approach to Jerusalem. Well, he came up through Jericho on his way to the cross. So that's another example. And then history tells me, you know a lot more about this than I do, but did not the Roman legions travel up the Jericho Road in 69 AD on the way to destroy Jerusalem? That's not a Bible story, but it's a pretty pivotal event in the history of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's 3 stories, at least going one way, but there's actually a couple of Bible stories where they were being traveled the reverse way. David was leaving Jerusalem when he was trying to escape from his treacherous son Absalom in 2 Samuel 15. So he was headed
Yep.
from Jerusalem to Jericho. And then King Zedekiah, when he was fleeing from the Babylonians in 586, he was headed that way in 2 Kings 25.
Yeah, as those are good examples. And as David, I like to think about this, whenever I read that passage. David, he goes up over the Mount of Olives, or he goes up on the Mount of Olives, which is just east of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember right, he goes to then Nob, Scopus. So the Romans later renamed Scopus because in Titus's siege of Jerusalem, the Romans encamped out on that hill, which is just north of the Mount of Olives, and a possible location where the priests of Nob were slain by Doeg. But as David is leaving Jerusalem, he goes Mount of Olives, Nob, and then down to Jericho, which makes total sense because from Nob, I've looked down several times onto Jericho, and it's pretty cool. You can turn around in one direction and see Jerusalem Temple Mount right in front of your face, and then you turn to the east, and then there's Jericho right down there. And that is one of the best examples that I like to give of how close everything in Israel is together. When you're standing on a hill and you can look around and see so many different notable biblical places, it helps you get your bearings, and it helps you appreciate how close so many things are. And so when you look down onto Jericho from Nob, you can visualize David going all down that way, fleeing from Absalom.
Yeah, and the road though to Jericho, the main road was a little bit east of Nob, so maybe he was taking a little side path to try to stay off the main road to
Ah,
avoid
yes, yes,
detection,
yes.
right? So
Oh.
there's that possibility as well. But so Matthew 20:18, Adam, Matthew 20:18, in that passage, this is where he's headed to Jerusalem for his final time. But Jesus says to his disciples, "We are going up to Jerusalem." What does that mean?
Well, anytime you go to Jerusalem, you're always going up to Jerusalem. I mean, in one sense, spiritually, you get your Psalms of Ascent. Spiritually going up there, Psalms of Ascent, maybe going up the very steps of the temple, but it's higher in elevation than everything around it.
It is. It's probably about 2,500 feet above sea level, which doesn't seem that high unless you live in Southwest Louisiana, where I did for many years, and the high point in the county, or the parish rather, was about 10 feet above sea level. But everywhere around Jerusalem, you have to ascend to Jerusalem from it's essentially a high point. It's built upon a ridge, and we'll kind of hopefully touch on that later when we talk about another road. But it's 2,500 feet above sea level, and Jericho, from where Jesus is coming there in Matthew 20, it's about 850 feet below sea level. So do a little quick math there, and in a short 17 or 18-mile stretch of road, you're traveling 3,350 feet in elevation difference.
Yeah, and you can really appreciate that when you think about Jericho being right off the Dead Sea, which is the lowest spot on the surface of the earth.
Yeah, so not only is it quite a climb to go from that area, of course, Jericho's just on the northwestern edge, so to speak, of the Dead Sea. So you're right, it's very, very low, very tropical. And then, of course, you go up to Jerusalem, and it's very, very different weather, much more enjoyable and serene weather than it would be down in the valley there of Jericho. So, what's between them? Is it an easy trip, or what's going on? If you're going up to Jerusalem from Jericho, what are you going to encounter on the way there?
Probably going to find some bandits. It was
Yeah,
famously dangerous trek, hence the Good Samaritan falls into
right.
bandits, and it was kind of famous for its danger in that regard. But yeah, like you said, from a tropical environment to a cooler one, so you're going from desert in a kind of a short distance up to the rugged hill country, and so you're seeing a change of terrain. Yeah, the road would have had to been winding and just difficult to traverse.
Yeah, for sure. And the Judean wilderness through which that road travels is rugged. It's barren. It's dry. It's hot. It's a miserable walk unless it's in the wintertime. It's a tough and dangerous road to take. And today, if you travel along Highway 1 from, well, either way, from Jerusalem to Jericho, the other way around, one of the things that you'll see as you're traveling down the modern highway is you'll see a lot of Bedouin camps. They've been living in that area for, as long as men have been in that region of the world, and many of them don't want to change. They want to remain exactly where they're at and the lifestyle that they did. But it's kind of striking when you're driving down maybe a modern tour bus, and you look outside your window and you see the Bedouin camps just
Hmm.
right off the highway.
Yeah.
You'll also see some Roman era castles in ruins, and sentry posts and aqueducts that are in different states of ruin along. Well, if you have to get off obviously the main highway to see them, but along that route. And when you finally get to Jericho, just outside of Jericho, you're going to see you can see an ancient palace built there by King Herod. So there's a lot to see in that particular trek. And then as you are approaching as you are approaching Jericho and getting closer down into the tropical area of Jericho, which by the way, does have an oasis, so that's why there is a city there in the middle of this wilderness. There's a good reason for it to be there, and that's because of the water. You can always find cities around water in those days. But you've traveled through a sharp valley known as the Wadi Kilt. A wadi is Wadi. That's just another word for a dry riverbed, and it's dry because it doesn't rain hardly at all in the Judean wilderness, but because of the descent from Jerusalem all the way down to Jericho, when it rains in Jerusalem, and it does quite a bit in the winter months, perhaps like say between November and February, the water will rush down the hillsides of Jerusalem down into this sharp valley that's cut all the way from Jerusalem down to Jericho, again called the Wadi Kelt. And that's how water will come to cities that are in the Judean wilderness. And there's many sad stories of hikers, for example, who were caught off guard by the flash floods of a winter rain, who were traveling through the red rocked cliffs there alongside the Wadi Kilt and were tragically killed, for example. But there's also a fourth century monastery there. It's cut into the cliffs. So it has its own rugged beauty, and yet it's a very dangerous and difficult climb. There's some other folks that may have walked that path. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but it seems like that might have been a road taken by Elisha, for example, or the spies who escaped from the house of Rahab shortly before the Israelites came across the Jordan River. And maybe do you think maybe the Magi from the east came that way, Adam?
Be interesting to know, where the following the star took them. They came to Herod in Jerusalem, so I would suppose it's quite possible, or maybe even probable, coming from the east. Um, yeah, it'd be fun if they took that route.
Yeah, I wish I could just sit down someday with a picnic basket somewhere along that route and ask the stones to tell me the stories that they have seen over the years. But so the Jericho Road, probably one of the most famous roads. There's some others that we can look at. How about the Via Maris? What's the Via Maris? Do you know much about that, Adam? I know you do.
I do, yeah. I love the Via Maris. Thinking about it, all the layers of history that happened there, and I've traveled. I've traveled. I haven't had to walk it, thankfully. I've driven it, ridden it. It's where all the world's international traffic went. It's so important in God's program for history and where He placed Israel and why He placed him there. Because it, anyone who's anyone in the ancient world is either going to or from Egypt, and they had to pass right along the Via Maris to get there.
Yeah, it's quite a different route. You know, the first road, Jericho Road's going from Jerusalem east to Jericho or northeast, and it's a much shorter road than the Via Maris. The Via Maris is an international road, as you mentioned. Like you said, it goes from Egypt all the way up to Mesopotamia. It's called the Via Maris, which again means the way of the sea. So it's along a very scenic and beautiful and cool, with the wind whipping through your hair from off the Mediterranean Sea. A very, very nice stretch of road compared to the Jericho Road. And it's going more north and south, or from the southwest to the northeast, perhaps we could say. But it's an enjoyable stretch of highway that runs through alongside the Mediterranean Sea. It's
Californians
got,
might compare it to the Pacific Coast Highway.
that's a great illustration for sure. And I've never been along the coast there of um, California, but I would imagine it would feel much the same.
Yeah,
So,
terrain a little different, but I mean, I've been on the Pacific Coast Highway for a little bit as well.
okay.
Similar concept. You're just kind of going along the sea, north to south. Little bit different view. The Mediterranean Sea and environs looking a little bit different than the Pacific Coast as it reaches the California shoreline, but same concept.
Okay, well, let's travel along the road a little bit, at least the stretch that goes through Israel. So you've come out of Egypt, you're a caravan or a merchant or maybe even a lone businessman trying to head back north to Israel or beyond. And what probably one of the first major cities that you're going to run into as you get into Israel is Gaza. Of course, that's been in the news a lot lately. And then the road's going to continue along the coastline. It's going to hit a city called Lod. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but tell me about Lod.
Lod is, well, it's where the airport is. The Lod, which is close to Joppa. So when you're reading the book of Acts, Lod used to, it's called Lod because it was called Lydda, the village of Lydda, where Paul healed Tabitha, right? Tabitha, Lydia, Tabitha,
Aeneas.
Mary. No, yes. I'm just trying to think. He heals, well, it's in Lydda that he heals. No, he's going to, okay. Yes. He heals the man in Lydda and he goes to Joppa um, to heal her there.
So yeah, Lod is a very highly populated stretch of road these days, and you keep on going, you're going to hit Aphek a little further north. That's where the Philistines encamped in 1 Samuel 4 before they defeated the Israelites and killed Eli's sons and captured the ark and all of that. And then if you keep going, you're going to hit Mount Carmel, and that's where, of course, we know Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal. It's a really picturesque road along the sea, a little off of of course, the sea. But suddenly, it's going to run pretty unimpeded along the coastline until it reaches the face of Mount Carmel, and then it's either a tough climb over Mount Carmel, or the terrain will sort of force you more towards the northeast, away from the sea, and then you'll come to a well-known pass through the mountain range there called Megiddo Pass. And we know a lot about Megiddo. Of course, Megiddo is well known for its mountain there, the mountain of Megiddo, or in Hebrew, Har Megiddo, or Greek Armageddon is how we would say it. And so you come through the Megiddo Pass, and it spills out to the Jezreel Valley, and that's probably where all the armies of Armageddon will have stage their forces in the last days before they turn their attention more on Jerusalem further south. So you go through the Jezreel Valley, and then you leave the valley, or as you're leaving the valley, you'll pass Mount Tabor. That's got some amazing history to it. Some people think that's where the Transfiguration took place. It's certainly where Deborah and Barak launched a successful attack against the Canaanites. And then it continues northeast up to the Sea of Galilee, goes up the west side of the Sea of Galilee, then kind of follows it around a little bit to the north until it hits the city of Capernaum, the adopted hometown of Jesus. And then from there it heads north. It passes Hazor. Now, I've never been to Hazor. I want to see that. Have you been to Hazor before?
I have a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. It's the biggest tell. It was the biggest size wise tell or city in the ancient Canaanite world, and it was the home base of Canaanitic operations. And as Joshua was conquering the land, Hatzor was that kind of that capital of the northern kings who tried to rally together against Joshua and the Israelites. It's fascinating what they've uncovered there. Even some burn layers at Hatzor that you can
Yeah, for
see from
sure.
the time of Joshua and from Deborah and Barak.
Well, once you pass through Hazor, the home to King Jabin, again defeated by Deborah and Barak in Judges 4, then it begins to blend more or less with the international highway that's going to continue northeast into Mesopotamia, and then you're out of Israel proper. But how many key cities does the Via Maris travel? And you can see some pretty fun archaeology up in Canaan. You can see, or excuse me, up in Capernaum. There's a lot you could say about the history of the Via Maris, but it's certainly a beautiful and scenic route, and it's witnessed a lot of witnessed a lot of military back and forth over the years between Egypt and Mesopotamia. So folks who lived along that route sure saw their degree of troubles, but it's also no doubt witnessed many miracles as well, and significant events in the biblical lives of the saints. And even of Jesus and the prophets. So anyway, it's a fun drive to make. If you haven't made it, you can come to Israel with us, and we'll make it with you. How about that?
Yes.
So, all right, and then let's see. The third one maybe we can look at. Let's see how far we can get today. Is the King's Highway. The
Mm-hmm.
King's Highway. Okay, so we started with the Jericho Road, kind of on the eastern side of Israel today, and traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and then we went to the western side of modern Israel, and then the King's Highway. To talk about that, we actually have to step out of modern Israel today and go back in time to the days when, well, the King's Highway first comes into shape in the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt and then up through the Sinai Peninsula, and then they plod north through the Sinai Peninsula towards the Promised Land along this route called the King's Highway. It was very difficult and desert terrain because, as you can see, we're on the east side now again of Israel, and I guess what would be ancient Israel, and what today would be the western edge of Jordan. So we'd be going up the King's Highway a little bit now off the eastern side of the Dead Sea. And again, it's a very barren and difficult stretch of land because we're sort of back in the Judean wilderness type of topography. But there's a lot of landmarks and sites related to the Bible that we could talk about. I've got this great book. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I've got a book in my library that my wife gave me for, I think, a birthday or Christmas a number of years back. It's called The Roads and Highways of Ancient Israel.
Hmm.
I guarantee this book was somebody's dissertation because you don't just sit down and write this book. It's incredibly detailed with maps, and he must have spent many hours of his life, years of his life, carving out all the details of this book. And it's a little technical at times, but you can get some good information from it. And I love that book. I've come to love it a lot. But in that book, The Roads and Highways of Ancient Israel, it says that there is one road, one and only, he says, one road
Hmm.
mentioned in all the Old Testament that wasn't named for its destination, because that's kind of generally how we name roads. We name them for destination. You mentioned earlier, for example, Alexander Road. That's a road there where we both used to live off of in Stephenville, and
Yep.
it's called Alexander Road because it's headed to Alexander.
Alexander.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I kind of learned this concept. Well, I've learned this concept before moving out to Texas, but Texas is really where like I could see it illustrated in the American side. Because in Israel, you learn these roads, and they named them because that's where they would take you to, which makes sense in the ancient world. Why else would you build a road unless you're going to a certain place? But moving down to Stephenville, that's where I saw it illustrated on the American side. Lingleville Road takes you to Lingleville.
Yeah.
Alexander Road takes you to Alexander. Highway 281 takes you to 281ville. You know, it works. No, just kidding
Yeah,
around.
but the
But
book says, and it's a pretty good source, only one road mentioned in all the Old Testament that wasn't named for its destination, and it is the King's Highway of which we're speaking. Now, what's it named for? Well, here's what he says. And now I would have said, and I probably would have probably taught this and may have for all I can recall, but I would have assumed that it was named for the powerful kings who monitored this route because this particular highway goes up through some of these nations you'll recognize, Edom and Moab and Ammon, and it travels right through there. And so I assumed that it was named for these kings who collected taxes from the people traveling from Africa to Asia and Asia to Africa back and forth through this international highway. But he suggests that it's more likely a general expression that means the main highway.
hmm,
So there's that.
okay, yeah,
Yeah, but it's prone to, if you travel this particular road, even today, there's a lot to see. Of course, you'd be on the Jordanian side now, but this again would be the route that the Israelites were taking as they're headed up to camp before they would actually cross over into Jericho. And you'd have to pass Elat, when you're coming out of the Sinai Peninsula, you would have to cross what's modern day Elat, biblical Elath, and that's where King Solomon had his navy station for a while. And then you pass Mount Nebo, eventually more further north, and that's where Moses passed away. And it's going to eventually lead through the tribal lands of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh, and not too far off the highway there, the King's Highway, would be the Nabatean city of Petra, and that's where many people believe that the Jews will flee during the time of great persecution that's described in the book of Revelation. So it's again a very tough terrain, dry terrain, but a lot of events of the Bible went right down or right up the King's Highway. Anything to add there for us, Adam?
Oh, that's a pretty good summary. And if he's right of why it's named the King's Highway because it was the main highway, that would make sense too because it really was kind of that premier route of international traffic besides the Via Maris. If you weren't going to Egypt and you were
Right.
staying on the east side of the Jordan to get to the other important kingdoms in that area, yeah, that was a heavy trafficked route for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we can get one or two more highways in today. Let's look at the Emmaus Road. I find this road fascinating. You could say a lot about it, but there's a lot you can't say about it. For example, we don't know where it is.
Yeah.
Now, why are we talking about a road that we don't know where it is? But we don't know for sure. Now, recently, the Jewish National Fund, they created a new 12-mile hiking trail between a city called Abu Ghosh. I've always liked the name of that city, Abu Ghosh, and this is the site that the Crusaders identified as Emmaus. It's about 7 miles from Jerusalem. So they built a hiking trail from Abu Ghosh to Nicopolis. That's sort of the new popular contender for the biblical city of Emmaus. Have you heard of that in the literature, Adam? Been reading anything about
I
Nicopolis?
think
It's
so. That's
19 miles from Jerusalem.
Yeah, that'd be further west of Abu Ghosh, down kind of the Soric Val, the hills on the west side of Jerusalem. Is it kind of down further west as you get into the Shvela?
Yeah, you'd almost think like it's a way that you would be kind of heading out of Jerusalem if you wanted to head west and circumvent Samaria on the west side
Yeah, yep.
to head up to maybe Galilee or down somewhere else in the south. It's almost like a cut through, almost like an east-west sort of road that then after you get a little further away from Samarian lands, you can choose to go north or south. But it's in the Bible, it's described as being 60 stadia from Jerusalem. At least you'll read that in Luke 24:13, and that converts roughly to 7 miles. So historically, most people have believed that it's about 7 miles from Jerusalem. So then, why does the Jewish National Fund believe that it equates with Nicopolis, which is 19 miles from Jerusalem? Well, we can't know. We don't know exactly where the road is, and then Bible teachers can't even agree on the actual distance it is from Jerusalem, because there's a rival manuscript, particularly one that says that Emmaus is actually 160 stadia from Jerusalem, and that would be 19 miles, and so that's why they do that. So I'm reading an article not too long ago in the Biblical Archaeological Society. Pretty much familiar with that organization, Adam?
Yep.
Yeah, it's one of the premier sites in archaeology, and I know that's kind of your strength for sure. Well, in the Biblical Archaeological Society article I'm reading, it actually listed 9 separate contenders for the location of Emmaus, west of Jerusalem. So they had 9 possible sites that people have considered over the years. Did you know there were that many possible sites people thought
I've heard that
might
there's a
be in
lot. It's yeah, hotly contend. Well, I don't know how hotly contended, but yeah,
it?
it's famous for being kind of an unknown location. So everybody and their brother is
Yeah.
going to take a guess at it.
And then I'm also reading a guy named Leon Rittmeyer, who I really respect for what
Yeah,
some things he's written about the archaeology of the Temple Mount. He's still living, I think. He's an older man, probably well into his 80s, but just arguably one of the world's most premier
yeah.
archaeological voices on all things Jerusalem. And I don't know if you know this, but he believes that Emmaus is really just another name for the city of Bethel.
I've heard of that. Yeah,
Okay, that was new to me. I hadn't heard that, and that's to why that's so intriguing is because that's north of Jerusalem. All the other contenders, the nine contenders by the BAS, that's a different direction now entirely. If he's right, that Emmaus is the city of Bethel in the north. So we don't really know. We don't know where it's at. We don't know how far it is from Jerusalem. But let's say that it is the western road leading out of Jerusalem, and that's a pretty part of the country. At least it's
yeah,
far different from anything leading east out of Jerusalem. And the Jewish National Fund that has created this hiking trail. I've seen pictures of it. I haven't ever taken it, but it's beautiful. You can see wildflowers along the trail, and there's almond and olive trees. It's just a gorgeous trail to take if you want to spend an afternoon or a morning. And it just reminds us, of course, and the reason why we bring up this story is because it's a connection to the story of Jesus when he meets the two men on the Emmaus Road following his resurrection. And so we don't know where the road is, as I said. We can't even agree on its distance, but what we can agree on is that the story of the Emmaus Road is intended to introduce us to the truth that our Savior was spoken of in the prophets as being um, the Messiah, the one who would come. And that's the main idea. So whenever you think of Emmaus, we think of Jesus. We thank God that he sent the deliverer that he had promised so many years before to come and wrong all the rights, um, to correct all the wrongs in our life and make everything right by his suffering. That's what I'm trying to say. So the Emmaus Road, very, very interesting and very biblical, strong biblical connection to the life of Jesus. Let's see if we can take one more. How about the road of the patriarchs, Adam?
yeah.
Yeah, so the road of the patriarchs has several different names. Can you think of any other names for the road of the patriarchs?
Um, ooh, I don't know. That's a good one. That should have been the trivia question.
Should have
Other,
been. Yeah,
yeah,
well, you
name another name for the Road of the Patriots.
yeah, well, as soon as
Uh,
I say this, you're going to go, "Oh, I know that one." It's called the commonly it's called the Watershed Road.
oh, sure. Yes, of
Okay,
course.
so why is it called the Watershed Road?
You're going up along the ridge. So Jerusalem, as we mentioned, is up on the hills. On the west side of the country, you have the lowland plains that come off the Mediterranean. Then you have the Shvela, the hill country. Then you come up into the upper hill country, the higher quote unquote mountainous regions. Not really mountains; they're just high hills. And so that runs north south. Well, if you keep moving east, it dips down towards the Jordan Rift. So you're up on an elevation. To the west and to the east of you are the lower lands. And so the watershed ridge route is where the rains come down. And as they land up on those high hills, they flow one way or another. And they flow off to the west almost exclusively. And so that's why everything on that side is more green and lush, but it's the water shedding off that high elevation down to the lowland. So the watershed ridge route.
Okay, and here's another name for the road that you're going to say, "Yeah, you're right, Daniel." Highway 60.
Highway 60.
Yeah, it's the modern
Highway
name
60, of
for it,
course.
right? So it it's a this road is about 160 miles long if you travel it from Beersheba in the south all the way to Nazareth, Jesus' hometown in the north, where it essentially um, ends at least a parade of the major cities along this route. There was a movie that came out, a documentary with Mike Pompeo about I don't know, 3 years ago, and my oldest son and I went to the movie theaters to actually see this, and it
Really?
well worth your time. I didn't look up the name of it in advance of the podcast, but if you typed in Mike Pompeo and Highway 60, and it's gonna pop up. I think it's called like Highway 60 or something along those lines.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll
Have
definitely
you not
check it
seen
out.
that?
No, I,
Yeah.
I didn't even know about that.
Oh
That's
wow. Okay.
cool.
Maybe it didn't come to Stephenville, but yeah, it's a fantastic accounting of all the major cities that are along this route, and of course it kind of rehearses the names of the people. It's called the Road of the Patriarchs because how many of the patriarchs traveled north and south along this road repeatedly? You can go through the book of Genesis and you find Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and later even King David, who regularly traveled this route, and they even settled in some of the cities along the route. For example, different other patriarchs lived in Hebron and Jerusalem and Shechem. These are all major cities along Highway 60, or the Road of the Patriarchs, or the Watershed Road, as we can call it. And so the history of the Old Testament can't really even be told without being able to stand somewhere along Highway 60, the Road of the Patriarchs, to watch the patriarchs go really parading by. I kind of tongue in cheek call it ancient Israel's ancient parade route
Hmm.
because they go up and they go back, and it reminds me of my younger days when I used to grow up in Longview, Texas, watching the Christmas parade and the fire truck and the red-headed Shriners and the snappy green and white uniforms of what would eventually become my high school marching band. And you'd sit, you find a spot there in the middle of the parade route next to the judges table, and you could get a pretty good sense as they would stop there before the judges, and you get a good look at it all. And it was kind of just a highlight of my younger years. And probably right in the middle of this parade route, as we might call it, would be the city of Shechem. And there's a lot of history just in Shechem alone. We could spend a podcast on each of these cities, Hebron and Jerusalem and Shechem, or a whole series. But
We have, I think. We
yeah, probably have.
we have a Hebron episode, a Shechem episode, and
Yeah.
of course
Okay.
many episodes that talk about Jerusalem.
Yeah. Well, Abraham originally entered the land of Canaan, and his first stop was Shechem. And Jacob's first stop was Shechem when he was headed out of the promised land. Jacob's daughter Dinah had her unspeakable tragedy there. You read about that in Genesis, and there's just a lot you could talk about. Gideon's son, who lived and ruled there, and Rehoboam, the son of King Solomon, was crowned there, and the Israelites, they recited their blessings and cursings of the law in the shadow of Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim that are there, and John 4 was there, and that's just one city, Shechem. So it's major events happening all along this parade route, if you will, and you can study any one of them as we have and talk them through. But it's a major road that today would as you leave Jerusalem, for example, would go. If you went north out of Jerusalem, you're going to go right into the heart of the West Bank. But incredible history on the road that today again called Highway 60, or the Watershed Road. Okay, anything there you wanted to add, and then maybe we can leave it there. But great stories. We could talk about the Rift Valley Road and so many other places in the Bible that we could have touched on, but we took some of the bigger ones, and hope you even too, Adam, enjoy the travel along those roads today.
I certainly have. Thank you for a trip down memory lane.
Well, I guess it's time to revisit our trivia question, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, when I gave those possibles to you earlier, did you write them down? Did you have you had a chance take a peek at them because I asked which of these groups of three is not like the others, and there's a lot to think through there. Perhaps you'll probably get it, but which of them doesn't belong, Adam? Is it Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Is it Adam, Seth, and Noah? Is it Boaz, Obed, and Jesse? Or is it David, Solomon, Rehoboam? And you're probably, with your answer, going to tell our listeners which one's correct and why it's correct, right? You got it?
Yes, I'm pretty sure I have this one, unless it's a trick like, oh, one of them, their names equal up to an even number of letters,
No,
and
it's not like that.
nothing like that. What, they all had cleft palates, or no, okay?
No.
No, I think if I'm right, three of these
Okay.
represent three generations. You have father to son to that person's son. One of them does not. One of them,
Ah,
there are several gaps of generations between the son and the third person. So
okay.
I'm going to say the second set is not like the other because you do have Adam and his son Seth, but then Noah is not Seth's direct son. He comes several generations later. Whereas the other three sets, you have Abraham, father's Isaac, father's Jacob. You have, if I'm remembering right, Boaz, father's Obed, father's Jesse. And then what was the final set? You have
David,
David,
Solomon,
Solomon,
Rehoboam. Yeah.
Rehoboam. Yeah. So I'm going with
Well, you're
set number
absolutely
two.
right. No,
All
you
right.
got it. You're right. Adam and Seth and Noah would be the correct answer. They do not belong. They do not look at the others for the reasons that you said. Well done. I hope that was fun for you. So I want to give you a little, you and our listeners, a little ministry update. The last podcast, we did a wonderful podcast on planning my trip to Israel. And I was a little nervous that they might cancel my trip with all the security concerns, and they had canceled one leg of my trip at that time. But I was still very, very hopeful that um, I would be able to get back, or they were threatening. I think I was fearful that they were going to cancel one leg of my trip. But talked to the airlines. They said no, no, we're hopeful that it'll be okay. But in the end, they did cancel my flight.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
could not get to Israel for this trip. My trip of a lifetime with myself and my middle son will have to wait, and I'll have to explore it another day. I was really looking forward to seeing folks there that I knew, and to just take some time and go anywhere I wanted for a change,
Yeah.
but not able to do that. So hopefully things are looking up. I saw in the news that Hezbollah and Lebanon have at least tentatively agreed, at least as of a day or two ago, they had agreed to a U.S. brokered ceasefire with Israel. So that's promising news. And the war in Gaza is still raging, but it seems like it's coming more closer to a conclusion than we've been able to say in a long time. So
Yeah.
maybe things in Israel will settle down and we'll be able to get back there very soon. But I wanted folks to know, I didn't make it, but we sure had a fun time talking about it, and hopefully I'll get there sooner than later, and I'll see what the conditions are on the ground there, and I'll be able to convince lots of folks to come with me the next time. So
Indeed. Yeah, we certainly had fun planning your what will
yep,
be next trip, right?
yeah, for
And
sure.
you had said in that episode, if the Lord wills, if the flights don't get canceled, you knew that there was a chance that it wouldn't happen. But it was fun anyway talking about it. And as in all things, the Lord's timing is perfect. My heart broke. Well, my heart broke for you in learning that you couldn't go, and it was later that day after we recorded that you learned that.
It
So
was
it was that same day. I'm like, oh no, um, but I was also saddened as we were recording that you were concerned you wouldn't even get to go to where Jake wanted to go the most, to fish in the Sea of Galilee.
right.
And so that was sad. I'm like, I would hate for you guys to go and not be able to do the thing that Jake wanted to do the most. So, as in all things, the Lord's timing is perfect. That means hopefully in the near future, you and Jake can go and
Yeah,
then
you'll get to fish. Yeah,
fish in the Sea of Galilee and find my wristwatch.
I'll
If you
look
know,
for
you
it.
know. Yes.
If you can tell me the general location that you dropped it in the lake, I'll see what I can do.
It was on the east side, right at the base of Mount Hippus, but who's counting?
All right. Well, I'll get some scuba gear maybe and see what I can find.
Yes. Well, we sure do hope that you've enjoyed these stories for the road. Of course, whatever path the Lord brings you down on your journeys in Israel or anywhere in the world, know that He is always with you and guides you along the way. And walking closely with Him will never lead you astray down any winding or rugged road. Shalom, y'all.
Shalom, y'all.